Buenos dias. Good morning. Miss Joni here with third years with your book of the week, The Real Thief. This is the second part of The Real Thief. So grab a pillow if you want to get comfortable, and we will read. Have you found any interesting places to read while you're home? Like maybe your bed, your bedroom, or outside? I saw a picture of someone who was being very creative and put their sleeping bag into the dry bathtub and was hanging out in their bathtub with their book, doing their reading. So that seems kind of fun. The Real Thief. Sorry, I'll start. We left off when the king had convinced everyone that Gawain was guilty of this theft. And he was going to sentence Gawain right now. So they're in court. Gawain didn't feel like speaking. What's the use, he wondered. They've made up their minds. Why waste words? Well, said the king. Gawain hesitated some long seconds. Then he looked proudly into King Basil's eyes and turned and looked at all the others and said in a ringing voice, I am an honorable goose. How you could judge me otherwise, I do not know. Perhaps our Maker knows. Certainly he knows how much I once loved you. But now I hate each and every living one of you, and with all my heart for seeing evil in me that is not there. Shame on the lot of you. Is that all? Asked the king. That is all, said Gawain. I hereby sentence you to imprisonment in the castle dungeon until you have the goodness to tell us where you have hidden the treasure you stole, said the king. Then to the guards, put him in irons. Gawain stared at the ground and saw his own yellow feet. They, at least, seemed real. He could feel no compassion from anyone around him. He felt leaden, benumbed. Vaguely he heard the bell in the tower strike 3 times. When the guards approached him, carrying chains, a sudden rage fired his spirit. He saw the wide blue sky outside the courtroom. I will be rid of you all forever, he honked loudly. He beat his wings, and with a furious short run, he was off the floor and flying out of a big open window. The crowd ran around him. They watched him soar high over the town, high above the tallest steeples, and across Lake Superb. They saw him disappear into the forest on the other side. The king stood there and vowed to all gathered around him that he would track Gawain down and see that he got what was coming to him. The real thief, the one who should have been on trial, had been sitting in the courtroom watching the proceedings with much emotion. He was not easily noticed because he was small. Who was he, this thief? Oh, I do see something in the picture. Look carefully. A mouse, Derek. He was a friend of Gawain's, though he seldom saw him, tending to associate more often with creatures his own size. Several times during the trial, he had wanted to come forth and announce that he was the thief, not Gawain, but he was afraid. At one point, he felt that he was about to stand up and remind them all that the evidence against Gawain was merely circumstantial. It was not hard proof. But he couldn't do even that, because it might lead to the confession he wished he had the courage to make. How did Derek come to be a thief? Well, the treasure house was not so entrance-proof as the king, the architects, the builders, Gawain, the other guards, and everyone else thought. True, the walls were stone, a foot thick, and the floor was stone, and the only way in or out was through the heavy, well-locked, well-guarded door. The only way? Not really. Between 2 stones, in a corner of the floor, there was one small uncemented chink big enough for a small mouse to get through, take something with him, and Derek discovered it. Wouldn't the diamond have been bigger, though? It's interesting. One day, exploring an old mole run that started at his own door, he arrived right under the chink between those two stones, and like any mouse confronted with a small opening, he just had to know what was on the other side of it. Coming through, he found himself inside the royal treasury. He gasped at what he beheld. King Basil, who'd been there earlier, had forgotten to turn down the lamps, and from all sides the immense treasure of his kingdom glowed and glinted. For a long time, Derek just gazed about, overawed with the glittering abundance. He tiptoed here and there and shyly touched a few rubies, delighting in the red richness of their honeyed gleam. Remembering his own digs, his home among the rising roots of an old oak, the sometimes damp, sometimes crumbly walls, the rickety furniture, the bed he had recently made of a moldy piece of burlap, the smell of stale cheese and prehistoric earth, he was slowly overcome with sickening envy. And a strange, perhaps not so strange, thing happened. Though he had never, in his 5.5 long years of life, done anything criminal, he decided he had to have a bright red ruby, and he took one down through the chink and back to his home among the oak roots. For several days, he spent much of the time looking at his little apple, the stolen ruby. It's not really an apple, but to him it must look like an apple. Here's a picture of the sizes. And though he felt bad, on the whole, he felt rather more good than bad with the ruby in his possession. He knew he had done something wrong, but he soon went back to the treasury and, one at a time, he took a few more rubies. He had set these where he felt they showed up to good advantage. I think he's just setting them in his little, burrow?
Yeah,
cave? The place was beginning to look a lot better, and he felt somehow more like a mouse of consequence. Consequence, that's funny, just means something important. It doesn't mean the way we usually use it as something that happens because you did something. But a mouse of consequence or a person of consequence would be someone you need to pay attention to. When he went out briefly into the world, he noted that his friends treated him with more respect, perhaps because he was behaving in a more respect-commanding way. No longer satisfied with the less than modest existence of an unimportant mouse, he went back for still more rubies, and then for more. He now owned, or at least he had in his house, 29 claret-colored gems that glowed and sparkled warmly by the light of his lamps. He arranged them in various ways. First, he tried them as a border around his room, but he found they had to be spaced at too great intervals, and it was not the effect he wanted. Next, he placed them around his bed. The contrast with the burlap was startling. It had an almost humorous aspect that he liked. He wished he could share this with his cousin Geoffrey, but Geoffrey was a blabbermouth. Too bad. He would have to enjoy it by himself. He next discovered that lying down on his bed he couldn't see the rubies, and he wanted to be able to enjoy them from the luxury of a reclining position. He got up and scurried about, rearranging them in concentric circles in the middle of his floor. Concentric? I feel like that's a phrase that Miss Leslie likes. In concentric circles. So a circle in the center of another circle. Oh, these rubies. The bright red rubies made a brilliant sort of rug on the dun-colored earth. Later, he sat cross-legged on his burlap bed, playing his tiny zither, enjoying the new decor. I don't even know what a zither is or if that's a word. What do you think? The treasure wasn't his. He knew it wasn't his, but there it was on the floor, and it made him feel wealthy. He got up, fashioned himself a cane from a fine oak twig, and went out walking. Everyone he met said he looked very sporting carrying a cane. Very good, right? Very handsome. That night he dreamed he was the emperor of a realm populated by small creatures like himself. Mice, moles, frogs, bats, hummingbirds, and such, with large insects acting as servants. In the morning he went back to the treasury. Now he began taking bright golden ducats.
Ducats.
Ducats?
Ducats.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure.
Do we figure out what that was?
Ducats.
Or is it these?
No, ducats are like coins.
Yeah, these are coins.
Oh, well then probably. I thought those were pictures.
They look like coins.
Yeah, no, they're ducats are coins.
All right. As far as, where was I? In the morning, he went back to the treasury. Okay. He felt he was taking, not stealing, because it never occurred to him that he had become a criminal. As far as he was concerned, a criminal was a ruffian, a dangerous creature, ready to harm others, someone who belonged in prison. And Derek, though he knew he was wrong, knew he was not a ruffian and dangerous, but only Derek, a mild-mannered, good-hearted mouse. He was a very busy rodent, flying back and forth through the old mole run, carrying the heavy ducats. He was a worker, a collector, a decorator, and when he rested, a nabob. I don't even know if these words are real. N-A-B-O-B. Will someone please check that word for me and get back to me? Not right now. I'm giving them something to do. He decided the ducats, and this is also D-U-C-A-T. I've never come across this before, but Adriel seems very sure. Okay. Would look best on his walls. He built scaffolding, and with mighty efforts he raised the ducats and pounded them into the sides of his room, using a sledgehammer covered with cloth to keep from nicking the surface of the coins. He had to do this all by himself, lifting the ducats and holding them in place while he hammered. The effect was glorious. In the mellow golden glow all about him, the rubies were here and there mirrored in the ducats, and their own rubescent light was here and there, gilded by reflected images of the ducats on the walls. Derek decided to light candles. I like the way he thinks, at least with decoration. This was even better than lamplight because the flickering made the ruby and gold reflections dance ecstatically as Derek's heart beat with excitement. How utterly beautiful! If only he could share it with someone. Interesting point of view we have in this chapter. In the previous chapter, we had Gawain's thoughts. Gawain the goose, that was his point of view. And in this chapter right now, we have Derek's thoughts. So we have the story from his point of view. And it doesn't seem awful the way that he tells it, right? He picked up his cane, climbed down the stairs to the outside, and scampered into town. There he walked up and down the streets, pretending to be interested in the counters of shop windows, loitered on corners, saying hello to whoever passed by, and knowing that he could not tell anybody what he wanted so much to tell. It had to be a secret. If it had to be a secret, he might as well get the most out of having one. He sauntered along the boulevard with his cane under his arm and his paws in his pockets, knowing he knew something no one else did. He stopped to talk with a rabbit of his acquaintance, and as they wondered whether it was going to rain or whether the clouds were just threatening and not intending to deliver, he pictured his bejeweled home and smiled inwardly at the rabbit's ignorance. Derek ate truffles that night. They were hard to find, but he had taken the trouble to find and dig them up. He had them with a mellow burgundy 3 years old. Very luxurious here. Truffles are mushrooms, and the burgundy is a wine. He looked about him, satisfied. A bit of wine wet his whiskers. He wiped it. No, he was not completely satisfied. All the color in his little mansion was on the warm side. Red rubies, gold ducats, brown earth, tan burlap, wood, all yellowed by candlelight. He needed some offsetting coolness in the color scheme. He thought about this all night, and in the early morning he returned to the treasure house. He was still mightily impressed with what he saw there, but no longer was he overawed. He himself now lived in a similar luxurious setting. Rummaging about, he found some silver pieces of excellent craftsmanship, including a medallion of gracefully carved lilies that he had once seen pinned to King Basil's purple robe. He took this down the hole and back to his home, and then he returned for a few more silver ornaments, a couple of rings, a brooch, and an engraved spoon as big as himself. The silver spoon he leaned casually and artfully against the wall by his dresser. This was a picture of him walking around town. Oh, Derek. This is just a little picture, I think, of what's coming up. The silver medallion he placed on top of the dresser to serve as a sort of salver. The brooch he fastened over his door, and he hung the rings on the backs of his 2 chairs. Then he studied the results of his work from various viewpoints and saw that he had done well. But still, something was missing, a center of interest. He hurried back to the treasure house. Now that he had seen it, oh, there in the velvet covering, he discovered the Kallikak diamond. Its grandeur stunned him. Everything he had in his own home seemed poorer again by contrast. He had to have it, no 2 ways about it. Tremulous with excitement, breathless, alarmed at his own audacity, yet proud of it, he began moving the large diamond. This is going to be interesting. How is he, because I wondered, how would it get through that small crack? He pushed it off the table where he had found it. He rolled it along the stone floor, and when he reached the crevice, it dropped through. Okay. He rolled it along the mole run and got it into his house. I didn't think it was going to fit, honestly. Okay, this will be the last page for today. He didn't know it was called the Kallikak diamond and that it was world famous. He only knew how unspeakably impressive it was, flashing, radiating, almost alive. He knew where to put this gem, where it belonged, on top of his rickety table in the center of the room. He managed to get it up there, and then he lighted all his lamps and candles. The Kallikak diamond not only reflected the yellow light, but shot heavenly blue arrows everywhere. And the lights, the reflections, and the interreflections created a marvelous atmosphere that completely turned Derek's small head. His place was a palace, and he was mighty proud of it. True, it still smelled of stale cheese and of everlasting earth, and it still had rags in it and rickety furniture, but it was a palace all the same. Stuffed with cheese, wine, and mushrooms, he lay on his bed of jute that night, tossing, turning, belching, and thinking. Was it an accident that had led him through the mole run and into the treasure house? Or was it fate or some other great power? Was he not destined, being Derek, uniquely himself and no other, to come by this great good fortune? He wondered. He fell asleep late, and when he woke up, he felt he had to find a confidant. What would that be?
Confidant?
A confidant.
I don't know.
I could be your confidant. It's like a best friend.
Mm-hmm.
There must be someone he had not yet thought of with whom he could share his secret. And I'm going to stop there, and tomorrow we will finish the story. I hope you enjoyed it. That is all I have for today. Let me know if you're liking the story or what you think is going to happen at the end.
Who do you think is a
You
confidant?
can show that. That's wonderful. And then we will say hasta luego. Ooh, the diamond, I see. Adriel's been doodling and sketching.
The diamond and then Gawain. All right.
Can you
Bye.
just reach over? Hasta luego.
Bye.